So part of the deal when you start to move into analyzing politics from an anthropological perspective is um, being able to analyze politics without getting political. Uh, Getting political basically involves being emotional to a certain degree. So um, I would say that this takes some time. We're taught to get very emotional and political to the point where it's almost a taboo in our society to not talk politics at the dinner table or at a public place. I would argue that that's like a weird taboo that has been implemented into kind of American mentality, and probably due to the two-party system. Uh, this is basically how America was formed as a country. When we decided to rebel and revolt against England, it took conversations around the dinner table. It took harsh conversations with people who were loyal to England and people who wanted their independence, in bars and restaurants and dinner tables all over the country. So it's really actually where America's kind of political um, freedom and democracy is coming from. But then for some reason we've kind of instituted this taboo, and I believe that personally that the taboo has started to create some interesting binary structures that are so solidified that if somebody mentions that they're on one political party or voted for one person, then they don't speak to that individual anymore. Um, Remember, our identities are not totally tied to our political views and or ideology, and they shouldn't be. Uh, this is this is missing kind of a lot of life, I would say, if your whole mentality is around politics. Again, let's go back to the egalitarian band level society. They might have had to institute some self government or voting when some tough times came up, but otherwise, it was conversations about myths, stories, creation stories, the day, the weather, how they felt. Uh, it was very little of kind of political intrusion into life. I would say that TV and media have encouraged this as well. So some interesting, again, when we start to analyze them from a anthropological perspective, you can see that there's a lot of stuff going on in terms of politics, especially in America. Um, I mean, I can be invested in a political conversation, but I'm also uh, able to just view it from a social science perspective, right? Which is phenomenon. So uh, try to be social scientists. Don't get personal or emotional. Elections do, especially in America, cause cultural surgery, separating two main parts of the broader culture. You're supposed to come back together with inauguration. That doesn't seem to have happened in the last couple presidential elections. Um, and again, I always ask kind of on a social science level, right? What cultural events or components led to the election of President Trump? And again, we have to, I've talked to so many different people where they said, oh, well, these people don't know what they're doing and they voted for him, and or these people are voting for their pocketbook, and they create these binary structures on people. And in reality, it's not that simple. So again, looking at Trump's election, we have to be able to analyze that from a social scientist perspective, which is what were the impetus to that um, presidential, like, uh, I guess, underdog upset, depends on how you look at it. Even Trump himself didn't really expect to get elected. So there are reasons basically why he was elected in terms of culture and society. And one of those reasons, like we could look at in terms of globalization, we'll talk about that in a bit. Neoliberalism and globalization tend to make us question the importance of our own identity and whether or not our identity is important anymore. I would argue that in America and most countries, we had Brexit. The Philippines elected a far right candidate. We have plenty of examples of countries kind of having this in uh, this kind of internal debate or dialogue with themselves around what is our place in the world now that globalization is happening. And I think America did the same thing. And that's from a social scientist kind of perspective, right? Uh, how has culture responded to the election? How will the majority of people accept the outcome and join the broader American political environment and repair culture? Um, I we're let's see. So we're 2 years in from the election, pretty much, and I don't necessarily see the repair going on in the country. Um, I'm hopeful that it'll happen at some point, but it seems like both binary kind of political parties are still very much at odds. Uh, Democracy and power acceptance. This also used to be much more part of the American culture, which is when the other party got elected or the other person you didn't vote for got elected as president, we tended to get over it quicker and just kind of unite as a country. Nowadays, it's more like bashing and staying in your team corner. So being an American, um, I guess, doesn't have the same importance as which team you're on, which is fascinating because we have to look at the kind of the foundational institutions that are allowing these political parties, right? For me, I always liken it to the NFL. Um, if you like the game of football, right, and you're going to continue to watch the game of football, if you are a Raiders or a 49ers fan, if if they lose to each other or whatever, do you then hate the game of football? Right? Do you hate politics? Do you hate and then isn't it really kind of American to have this process? But we've kind of lost focus on the process itself and are more focused on our team, wearing the symbols and being a team member and being vocal and showing up to public events and sporting our team, rather than really looking at, uh, hey guys, isn't the game of football great? Playing catch with a Raiders fan or a 49ers fan, that is more of like a symbolic gesture for team. So these are important kind of aspects when looking at politics. Anthropology of policy, um, and this is where I'll probably get into what I call the case study of prison education. Um, Policy can come from a perceived cultural need or a political ideology or the need to fix a problem. Now, policy, if we take it to a broader level, individuals make policy, right? I have individual policy of a workout routine or what I eat. I've created my own food taboos, that are more family food taboos, but we created this policy, right? Like individuals create policy as well. It's not just the state creating policy. You have to remember at the band level society, when a group voted to move because there wasn't enough water or acorns, they were creating a policy. The policy was we're moving. And you had two sides and through that negotiation, you basically had two alternatives. One was to stay. You didn't have to stay with the band, or one was to continue with your group. And this is true with all policy, right? Let's say that there's a food taboo in my family, and let's say that one of us jumps ship and says, you know what, I don't want to do this anymore. Uh, I need to eat a steak or something like that, right? That may cause some dialogue and some discussion, um, and maybe even kind of a huge fight. But again, this is what policy does. It creates kind of these conflicts, as Max Gluckman would put it, that then kind of let us recognize the process itself, right? So policy is really the cultural change agent, right? So if we create policies internally, like personally, I run marathons. I run one marathon a year. That is a personal policy that I then am responsible to myself for. This could be related to goals and other things, right? But this is the personal level policy. Now, if we take it to a state level, we're creating things like legalizing marijuana, or Senate Bill 1391 allowing and paying for college instructors to go in and teach incarcerated students. So again, these are deep changes. No Child Left Behind has deeply shifted America's view around teachers. Their prestige level has dropped. Teachers are more stressed. There's more students in their classroom. They're expected to get higher test scores somehow, waving a magic wand from the federal level and state level. And again, it drastically changed the cultural actor's place. It puts students as more like widgets. It's commodified education. Curriculum is now a huge moneymaker. And I would argue that curriculum a lot of times is short-sighted and doesn't actually give us true history, right? This is why when I start anthropology classes, I have to talk to them about history and how really uh, inaccurate at times, but also incomplete at times history can be. So health policy is another one, but I really wanted to focus for the next kind of 5 minutes on Senate Bill 1391. Senate Bill 1391 at California state level um, was a policy signed off by the governor to allow junior colleges to go into the prisons, based on a study that showed that education reduces recidivism. Recidivism is people who are incarcerated end up returning at a very, very high rate. It's something like 75% at the top level. Um, but what they found is with education and degrees, that recidivism rate drops by that 75 drops almost in half with degrees. So if that's the case, the state's saving a lot of money in terms of its compounding effect. My broader kind of anthropology of policy research is looking at what are the cultural impacts, right? So if an incarcerated individual is, I mean, their shirts and everything say CDCR prisoner on them. If that individual views himself as a prisoner, but then goes to college full time for 15 units and sees professors show up every day to teach them, they're now shifting their identity. They're no longer seeing themselves as only prisoners, but they're seeing themselves as also college students. And this identity shift has profound effects on the general culture. The other piece is the kind of the positive externalities, which are the multiplier effects, right? So individuals who get out of prison, usually incarceration tends to be a generational thing where grandpa, dad, son end up being incarcerated. But so the multiplier effect of education is huge when we're talking about identity shifts, right? So if these individuals are being paroled and released and going back to their home communities and are no longer kind of practicing the maybe the deviant behavior that they were before and are going to college, that shift is going to spread to their children, to their grandchildren, to the community around them. And that has profound effects. And that is all coming from one policy change. Now, again, this is the effect that policy has on massive amounts of people. But I see it as happening at the individual level, and then there's a feedback loop of policy internally as a person has to create their own policies and study habits and some of those other things like I talked about earlier. And then that shift into taking that policy and implementing it maybe into their family, their microculture unit, and then that shift into a subculture. This is an amazing kind of phenomenon to look at. Anthropology of policy is really promoted by Susan Wright and Chris Shore. They're kind of the heads of this all. Previous to me getting a full-time anthropology, sociology teaching job with Saracoso, I was looking into working with Chris Shore at the University of Auckland in New Zealand for a PhD. I was going to focus on No Child Left Behind when I was proposing that. However, I got this job, and now my focus has kind of shifted more towards this policy of Senate Bill 1391. I am deeply entrenched in kind of this policy as I am a cultural actor that is affected. But I would also say that through that, it's fascinating. It's made me reflect more on teaching itself, right? When I teach incarcerated students, there's no technology, right? I have a marker and a whiteboard. I end up drawing pictures and being much more animated and probably much more question and answer. So my lectures have started to rely way less on technology than they used to, which is fascinating because I'm teaching an online class and you guys are watching a YouTube video. But again, these are all things that this one policy has done, right? I mean, it shifted my life completely to the point where I got this job and moved from the Bay Area and am now located in a new area, and I'm forming new community around this policy. So it is profound. And policy is a cultural change agent, whether it be band level, tribe level, chiefdom, state level. right?